Michael Thompson had lived peacefully in Oak Ridge Estates for 5 years. His modest single-family home sat at the edge of the neighborhood, backing up to a wooded area that provided privacy and a sense of seclusion. Recently, however, he noticed neighborhood teenagers using his backyard as a shortcut to the convenience store half a mile away. They trampled his garden beds and left trash behind. After politely asking several groups to stop without success, Michael decided to install a no trespassing sign along his back property line. The sign wasn't particularly large or garish, just a standard black and red metal notice he purchased at the local hardware store. He installed it on a Saturday morning, securing it to a wooden post where the shortcut path entered his property. Michael even took care to position it so it faced outward, visible only to those approaching from the woods rather than from within the neighborhood. That evening, he noticed a middle-aged woman in a beige cardigan standing at the edge of his property, arms crossed, staring at the sign with obvious disapproval. When she saw Michael watching her from his kitchen window, she quickly turned and walked away. Michael vaguely recognized her as Elaine Winters, a recently elected HOA president who lived 4 houses down. "Great," Michael muttered to himself. He heard stories from neighbors about how Elaine had been issuing violation notices for everything from unapproved mailbox colors to grass that was a quarter-inch too tall. Michael had managed to stay under her radar until now. 3 days later, Michael found an official letter from the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association in his mailbox. The envelope was marked urgent, covenant violation in bold red letters. Inside, the letter was printed on the HOA's letterhead and signed by Elaine Winters. It informed him that his no trespassing sign violated the community's signage guidelines outlined in Section 8.3 of the HOA Covenant. All exterior signage must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee prior to installation, the letter stated. Unapproved signage, especially those with threatening language, damages the welcoming aesthetic of our community and reduces property values. Michael nearly laughed out loud at the characterization of his standard no trespassing sign as threatening. The letter continued, "You are hereby directed to remove the sign within 72 hours or face a $50 daily fine until compliance is achieved. If you believe this notice has been issued in error, you may file an appeal with the HOA board, which will be reviewed at the next monthly meeting scheduled for the 15th. That was nearly 3 weeks away. Michael would be accumulating hundreds of dollars in fines by then if he didn't comply immediately. That evening, after a long day at the law firm where he worked as a paralegal, Michael pulled out the 3-ring binder containing all the HOA documentation he'd received when purchasing the home. He flipped to Section 8.3 regarding signage and read it carefully. The section primarily covered political signs, for sale signs, and decorative displays. There were restrictions on size, placement, and duration for these types of signs, particularly those visible from the street. However, Michael could find no specific prohibition against posting standard property notices like no trespassing signs, especially along a rear property line that wasn't visible from the street. The covenant mentioned that all custom signage required prior approval, but conventional signs available at retail stores were only mentioned in the context of temporary placement. Michael pulled out his laptop and began drafting an email to the HOA board, requesting clarification on which specific clause prohibited standard property signs at the rear of a property. He also added a note about the recurring trespassing issue, including dates and times when teenagers had cut through his yard, along with photos of trampled plants and discarded snack wrappers. As Michael typed, he glanced occasionally at the darkening woods behind his home. If the sign came down, the trespassing would undoubtedly resume. But if he left it up, he'd be starting a battle with the HOA, one that his neighbors had warned was rarely worth fighting. The next morning, Michael was drinking coffee on his back porch when he noticed Elaine Winters and 2 other HOA board members walking along his rear property line, taking photos of his sign with their phones. They hadn't knocked on his door or requested permission to enter his property. When they noticed Michael watching them, Elaine waved dismissively and called out, "Just documenting the violation, Michael. Remember, 3 days to remove it." Michael set down his coffee mug and walked across the dewy grass to meet them. He recognized Elaine's companions as Walter Chen, the HOA vice president who owned a local pharmacy, and Diana Guzman, a retired school teacher who recently joined the board. Unlike Elaine, they at least had the decency to look somewhat embarrassed at being caught wandering through someone's backyard uninvited. "Excuse me, but you're currently trespassing on my private property," Michael said calmly. "I don't recall giving you permission to be back here." Elaine's perfectly maintained smile tightened. She was dressed as if heading to a business meeting rather than tramping through backyards at 7:30 in the morning, crisp beige slacks, a navy blazer, and not a hair out of place in her shoulder-length bob. "As HOA board members, we have the right to inspect properties for covenant violations. It's in the agreement you signed when you purchased your home." She spoke with the practiced confidence of someone used to not being questioned. Michael, still in his pajama pants and a faded University of Virginia t-shirt, crossed his arms. That's interesting because I reviewed the covenant last night and it specifically states that HOA inspections must be conducted from common areas or public spaces. My backyard is neither. We're simply documenting a reported violation, Walter offered, glancing between Michael and Elaine. Reported? By whom? Michael asked. We're not at liberty to say, Elaine replied quickly. Neighbor complaints are confidential. Michael doubted any neighbor had reported a sign that faced outward toward the woods, invisible from any other property in the subdivision. Even if there was a complaint, that doesn't grant you permission to enter private property without consent. I'd appreciate it if you'd leave now and use proper channels for any future communications. Diana, who had remained silent until now, touched Elaine's arm. Perhaps we should go, Elaine. We can discuss this at the office. Elaine shrugged off Diana's hand. We don't need to justify ourselves to you. Remove the sign by Friday when the fines begin. She turned to leave but stopped after a few steps and added, and I'd suggest reviewing Section 12.4 regarding property line landscaping requirements. Those hostas you've planted don't appear to be on the approved species list. As the three board members walked away, Michael noticed a teenager cutting through from the woods, hesitating when he saw the sign and the group of adults. The boy made eye contact with Michael, then turned and disappeared back into the trees. At least the sign was working on its intended audience, even if it had created an entirely new problem. Back inside, Michael pulled out his phone and sent a quick email to his supervisor at the law firm, asking if he could come in an hour late. Then he called Jack Rivera, one of the partners who specialize in property law. If the HOA wanted to play hardball over a simple no trespassing sign, Michael needed to understand exactly what ground he was standing on, legally speaking. That evening, Michael spread the HOA documents across his dining room table. He had printed fresh copies of the covenant, bylaws, and architectural guidelines from the neighborhood website and pulled out the original documents from his closing paperwork. Sticky notes and highlighters lay scattered around him as he worked methodically through each section. After 2 hours of careful reading, he confirmed 2 critical points. First, there was no explicit prohibition against no trespassing signs, especially when not visible from the street. The signage regulations focused primarily on aesthetic consistency for street-facing displays. Second, the inspection rights granted to the HOA were indeed limited to observations from common areas and did not include the right to enter private property without permission. Section 14.2 stated clearly, board members may conduct visual inspections of properties from community common areas, streets, or with the express permission of the homeowner. Nothing in the document granted them the right to wander into backyards unannounced. As Michael was putting away the documents, he noticed his property survey folded at the bottom of the file. He hadn't looked at it since purchasing the home 5 years ago. Curious, he unfolded the large paper and traced the property lines. According to the survey, his backyard extended nearly 10 feet farther into the wooded area than he'd always assumed, meaning that not only had the HOA board members trespassed on his property that morning, but they'd actually been well within his boundaries, not near the edge as he thought. Michael took photos of the relevant covenant sections and the property survey, then sent them to his work email to show Jack Rivera in the morning. Jack had been with the firm for 20 years and specialized in property law. While HOA disputes weren't his typical focus, Michael knew he could have valuable insights. The next morning, Michael stopped by Jack's office before starting his own workday. So the neighborhood tyrant is giving you trouble, Jack said with a smile after Michael explained the situation. Jack was in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. His cluttered office was lined with legal texts and family photos. Seems that way, Michael replied. I just want to understand where I stand legally before this escalates. Jack reviewed the documents Michael had brought. Your interpretation of the covenant is correct. There's no prohibition against standard no trespassing signs that aren't visible from the street, and they absolutely don't have the right to enter your property without permission. He leaned back in his chair. But HOAs can be tricky. The courts give them considerable latitude in enforcing community standards. So what would you recommend? Document everything, Jack advised. I'd suggest installing a security camera covering that back area. If they enter your property again without permission, you'll have evidence of trespassing. Also send a formal letter stating that you do not grant the HOA permission to enter your property without prior written consent. Could I face legal consequences for keeping the sign up? Michael asked. Jack shook his head. The worst they can do is fine you under the covenant, but given the vague language about signage, you'd have a strong case if you challenged it. Actually, I'd argue the county regulations supersede HOA restrictions when it comes to property security notices. Michael nodded, feeling more confident. One more thing. What about the teenagers cutting through my yard? Am I liable if one of them gets hurt on my property? That's precisely why no trespassing signs are important, Jack explained. They established that anyone entering your property does so without consent, which provides you some protection under the state's premises liability laws. That afternoon, Michael ordered a wireless security camera system with motion detection and cloud storage. While waiting for it to arrive, he drafted a formal letter to the HOA board, citing the relevant covenant sections and respectfully asserting his right to maintain a security notice on his property line. 2 days later, the 72-hour deadline expired. Michael had removed his sign. The security camera system had arrived, and he had installed 3 cameras, one overlooking the backyard, one facing the no trespassing sign, and one covering his front door. He'd also sent his formal letter to the HOA board via certified mail, keeping a copy for his records. That afternoon, while Michael was at work, his phone buzzed with a motion alert from the security system. He opened the app and watched in real time as Elaine Winters and Walter Chen entered his backyard from the wooded area. Neither wore the business attire from their previous visit. Both were dressed casually, as if they were trying to be less conspicuous. Michael zoomed in on the camera feed. Elaine was carrying a large manila envelope, which she opened to remove an official-looking document. The video quality was clear enough that Michael could see the HOA letterhead. Walter looked uncomfortable, glancing repeatedly toward Michael's house as if worried someone might be watching. Elaine walked directly to the no trespassing sign and attached the violation notice with what appeared to be packing tape, smoothing it carefully to ensure it would stay in place. Then, instead of leaving immediately, she pointed to various areas of Michael's garden, apparently discussing other potential violations with Walter. They walked around his recently installed stone patio, pausing to examine his furniture and potted plants. Walter seemed to be taking notes on his phone. Throughout the entire 12-minute video, neither of them approached Michael's house or made any attempt to see if he was home. They had clearly assumed the property was empty and that their actions would go unobserved. When Michael returned home that evening, he went straight to the backyard. The violation notice was prominently displayed on his sign, sealed in a plastic sheet protector to shield it from the elements. The official notice indicated that he was now accruing a $50 daily fine for the signage violation, with payment due by the 1st of the month. Michael carefully removed the notice, took it inside, and checked his security footage again. The video clearly showed Elaine and Walter entering his property, walking around his garden beds, and examining his patio furniture before posting the violation notice. He downloaded the video file to his computer and made several backups. Something about their brazen trespassing, even after he'd explicitly told them they weren't welcome on his property, made Michael's patience finally snap. This wasn't just about a sign anymore, it was about basic respect for property rights and privacy. He called the non-emergency number for the county sheriff's office to report the trespassing and to ask about his options. After a brief wait, he was connected to Deputy Marcus Jackson. "So let me get this straight," Deputy Jackson said after Michael explained the situation. "Your HOA board members entered your private property without permission, even after you explicitly told them not to, and you have video evidence of this." "That's correct," Michael confirmed. "And this was their second unauthorized entry in 3 days. And this is all over a no trespassing sign that's facing the woods at the back of your property." "Yes, they claim it violates HOA guidelines, but I've reviewed the covenant, and there's no specific prohibition against standard property signs, especially ones not visible from the street." Deputy Jackson's voice took on an amused tone. "Well, I've responded to plenty of HOA disputes over the years, but this might be a first. HOA board members trespassing to issue a violation for a no trespassing sign." He paused. "For what it's worth, those signs are perfectly legal on private property in our county. In fact, they're recommended for properties that back up to public lands or paths." "What should I do?" Michael asked. "File an official report," the deputy advised. "I can come by tomorrow morning to take your statement and review the video evidence. Most first-time trespassing complaints result in a warning rather than charges, but it sounds like these folks need a reminder about property rights." The next morning, Deputy Jackson arrived at Michael's home promptly at 9 a.m. He was younger than Michael had expected, probably in his mid-30s, with a no-nonsense demeanor that softened when he smiled. His cruiser was parked visibly in Michael's driveway. A fact Michael suspected would not go unnoticed in the neighborhood. "Nice place you got here," the deputy commented as Michael led him through the house to the back patio. "I dealt with an HOA when I lived in Ridgewood Estates. Got cited for having my patrol car in the driveway overnight. Apparently, commercial vehicles weren't allowed." He shook his head. "Moved out 6 months later." In the backyard, Michael showed him the no trespassing sign and explained the recurring issue with teenagers cutting through his property. Deputy Jackson nodded. "This is a standard sign properly placed on private property, nothing illegal or even unusual about it." He took out a small notebook. "Now let's see this video evidence you mentioned." Inside, Michael played the security footage on his laptop. Deputy Jackson watched carefully, occasionally jotting notes. When the video showed Elaine and Walter examining Michael's patio furniture, the deputy raised an eyebrow. They spent 12 minutes on your property, he observed. That's not just a quick drop-off of a notice. They were conducting a thorough inspection without permission. He finished writing in his notebook. In my opinion, this clearly constitutes trespassing under County Code 42.3. What happens now? Michael asked. I'll file the official report and pay a visit to your HOA office today. Deputy Jackson closed his notebook. Since this appears to be a first offense and no damage was done to your property, they'll likely receive a formal warning rather than a citation. But it will be on record, which matters if it happens again. The deputy paused, considering his next words. Look, I should be impartial here, but between us, HOAs sometimes forget they're not actual government entities. They can't override county regulations or property laws. Your sign complies with all relevant codes. He handed Michael a case number card. Call me directly if they enter your property again. Later that day, Deputy Jackson visited the Oak Ridge Estates HOA office, which occupied a small space in the community clubhouse near the neighborhood entrance. When he arrived, he found Elaine and two other board members, Walter Chen and a woman he didn't recognize, seated around a conference table preparing what appeared to be various violation notices. Elaine looked up, startled to see a uniformed deputy in the doorway. Can I help you? Deputy Jackson introduced himself and explained that he was following up on a trespassing complaint. He placed his tablet on the table and played a short clip from Michael's security footage. This video shows you and another board member entering Mr. Thompson's private property yesterday without permission. The color drained from Walter's face. Elaine, however, remained composed. But we're the HOA board, she protested, straightening her posture. We have inspection rights according to our community covenant. Ma'am, I've reviewed your HOA covenant, Deputy Jackson replied. His tone was professional but firm. It grants you the right to conduct visual inspections from common areas, not to enter private property without consent. Your neighborhood rules may have provisions about property appearance, but they don't override state law regarding trespassing. The unknown woman spoke up, her voice quiet. I told you we should have called in first, Elaine. Deputy Jackson continued, I'm issuing an official warning today. This will be documented in our records. Any further unauthorized entry onto Mr. Thompson's property or any other private property in this neighborhood without the owner's permission could result in citations and fines up to $500 per incident. Elaine's jaw tightened. We'll need to consult our attorney about this. The covenant clearly. I encourage you to do that, Deputy Jackson interrupted politely. Your attorney can contact me with any questions. He handed Elaine his card. Also, for your information, no trespassing signs are perfectly legal in this county and supersede any HOA architectural guidelines. Have a good day. As he left the office, he noticed several residents had gathered outside, curious about the sheriff's vehicle in their community clubhouse parking lot. Word would spread quickly, he knew. In his experience, nothing captured neighborhood attention quite like a police visit to the HOA office. The next day, Michael returned home from work to find a certified letter from the HOA in his mailbox. The envelope was thicker than usual, which immediately set off warning bells in his mind. Inside, he found not one but 5 separate violation notices, each on official HOA letterhead and signed by Elaine Winters. Michael spread the notices across his kitchen counter, a sinking feeling in his stomach. The first notice reiterated the original complaint about his unapproved signage, maintaining the $50 daily fine. The other notices cited M4, improper garden edging, non-compliant materials used for landscaping borders, stone edging requires approval by architectural committee, fine $75/day, unapproved patio furniture, outdoor furnishings visible from common areas must maintain neighborhood aesthetic standards, fine $100/day, excessive shade plants, landscaping plan deviates from approved native species list, fine $125/day, unauthorized security camera installation, electronic surveillance equipment visible from common areas requires prior approval, fine $150/day. The combined potential fines total $500 per day, an amount that would quickly become financially devastating if enforced. Even more alarming, each notice indicated the violations had already been accruing for 2 days, meaning he supposedly owed $1,000 already. Michael's hands shook slightly as he reread each notice. This was clearly retaliation for involving the sheriff. What had begun as a dispute over a simple no trespassing sign had escalated into a full-blown campaign against him. He called Jack Rivera, who answered despite it being after office hours. This is harassment plain and simple, Jack said after Michael explained the situation. They're hoping he'll be intimidated into compliance. It's working, Michael admitted. I can't afford $500 a day in fines. Don't worry, Jack assured him. These notices will hold up to scrutiny. The timing alone, immediately after the sheriff's warning, makes the retaliatory nature obvious. Have you checked whether any of these supposed violations are actually mentioned in the covenant? Michael hadn't. He pulled out the documents again while keeping Jack on speakerphone. Together, they determined that 3 of the 5 alleged violations were either not covered in the covenant or fell within explicitly permitted guidelines. The other 2 were vaguely defined at best. Here's what we're going to do, Jack said. I'll draft a formal cease and desist letter from the firm. Meanwhile, you should email the entire HOA board, not just Elaine, and include your evidence. Following Jack's advice, Michael spent the next hour composing a measured email to all 7 HOA board members. He included the security footage of both trespassing incidents uploaded to a private link, Deputy Jackson's report confirming his sign was legal under county regulations, documentation showing his garden, patio furniture, and landscaping had all been approved by the previous board 2 years earlier, county regulations stating that security cameras on private property required no HOA approval, formally worded requests that all future HOA communications be conducted in writing or in scheduled meetings with his attorney present. He kept his language professional and factual, avoiding any accusations or emotional appeals. After sending the email, Michael poured himself a glass of wine and tried to relax, but his mind kept racing with worst-case scenarios. What if the fines held up? What if this dragged on for months? Could they put a lion on his house? Just as he was considering whether he should simply remove the sign and try to negotiate a settlement, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Hello, Michael Thompson speaking. Michael, this is Walter Chen. The voice sounded hesitant, almost whispering. I'm the vice president of the HOA board. Yes, I know who you are, Mr. Chen, Michael replied coolly. You were on my property twice without permission. I know, and I'm sorry about that. Walter's voice gained urgency. Look, I don't have much time to talk. I'm calling from my personal phone and Elaine doesn't know I'm contacting you. I think this has gotten completely out of hand. I agree, Michael said, his curiosity piqued. Elaine is. Walter paused, seeming to search for the right words. Well, she takes the rules very seriously. Too seriously, in my opinion. But some of us on the board think this has gone too far. These multiple violation notices right after the sheriff's visit look terrible for us. They're clearly retaliatory, Michael stated. I know, Walter admitted. I'm going to suggest we drop this whole thing at tomorrow's